पिक्चर अभी बाकी है.
My life's ambition was to be a quantum physicist. But then life had other plans.
I think I used to sort of fail at social sciences, history, and all sorts of subjects. I was a very underconfident guy.
What you saw of the world there, we kind of competed, I guess, but we were also really partners in crime in many ways.
The big beast in the room was IRCTC.
Most people don't understand that a SIM card is actually a computer. As they say, it's good to be on the leading edge, but not good to be on the bleeding edge. So much for my branding of distributing on 350 million. Cut that part from the show. Hi everybody, this is Sanjay Swamy here. Welcome again to a new episode of the Prime Venture Partners podcast. This time we have a couple of people as guests on the podcast, two of the very early names in the whole fintech financial ecosystem, and you can guess we're going to be talking about fintech and financial services today. So welcome Shrikant, the CEO of Perfios Account Aggregator Services, which is a part of the Perfios group.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And Anshul Rai, co-founder, CEO of Happay, now exited to CRED. Welcome, Anshul.
Thank you, Sanjay. Thank you for having me. I'm no longer the CEO.
Yes. Co-founder and CEO at the time, and now, of course, exited to CRED. So welcome to the episode. This whole space of fintech financial services has always been the next big thing in India, and Shrikant and I have fond memories of the very early days, probably circa 2005. And then all of a sudden it's had an explosive growth over the last 5-7 years ago, maybe even a decade. So the purpose, what we thought of in today's discussion is to actually talk about a little bit about the journey of where things started, what were some of the key, systemic inflection points that happened, and what has got us to here. And of course, towards the end, we'll also talk a little bit about where we think the opportunities are and where do we go from here in the overall fintech financial services space, both for, entrepreneurs here in India, as well, hearing your perspectives of, where the opportunities lie. And, we'll try to keep this as conversational, and, a lot of people have sent in some questions on the internet. So I'll try to incorporate all of those. So once again, welcome to the two of you. So maybe we'll start with a round of introductions, right? Maybe Shrikant, you can start a little bit with your background and, what got you, into this domain and, kept you in this domain for about 20 years now. So you definitely must either be really good at it or like it, or, maybe you have some views, but let's get started with that.
Actually, interestingly, I wanted to, my life's ambition was to be a quantum physicist. But then life had other plans. So I ended up in sales, right? So I started my career with FMCG sales, companies like Asian Paints and Coke, and then happened to join Amex in setting up their credit card sales and then merchant acquiring business in India. This is way back in the late 1990s, early 2000s. And then, like in most payments guys, that bug caught, right? Amex was a very unique place. It's a closed loop network, which means you see the transaction end to end, and then some fantastic magic you can create on that. So that was my initiation into what we today call payments tech, fintech. There are various words for that, but that was a solid grounding. 2000.
So maybe we can even step back a little bit. Which part of India are you from? Childhood ambitions, inspirations, things like that.
Okay, it's complicated because I was born in Hyderabad, brought up in Kolkata, and started my career in Madurai. I know some of you will search Google Maps, or I searched an atlas at that time when I got my first job, right? My biggest, foundational, anchors were really my parents. Mom was a scientist. She was part of the team that designed the heat shield for President Kalam's missiles. which we discovered after she retired. She said, by the way, I did this. Right?
Wow.
Dad was a chemical engineer and a lawyer. And he was one of the guys who set up what is today called the TRIPS, which really allows the pharma industry to manufacture generics at scale, way back in the 80s. So that intellectual grounding, that that quest for excellence has been inborn since then, right? Of course, academically it never showed up. We'll hush that part of it.
Picture abhi baki hai.
Picture ho chuka hai. But then, so I started off with a degree in physics, which is where I thought that quantum physics was my thing to be, but then didn't get through to a postgraduate. Then did the most obvious thing after that, found a career-related course, jumped into an MBA. And from then it's been one corporate / startup career after another. So a lot of my career graph has been a series of happy accidents, right? Basically been at the right time at the right place and made the best use of the opportunity. I think that's really what an entrepreneur's life has all been about. So that's the background.
Great. And we'll come back to the specifics, because I know from Amex you went to ngpay and then to Nokia Money, OboPay, then back to Amex and Amazon, and now back to being at a earlier or a relatively mid-sized startup. So Anshul, maybe a little bit about your background.
So my dad, he was mTech in civil, was in a government job. So we kept moving. I grew up in Haryana, but we moved to Punjab, then back to Chandigarh. I think the only superpower I had while I was a little kid was maths. I think I used to sort of fail at social sciences, history, and all sorts of subjects. But I think maths is something I'll actually cover 2 classes in advance, right? And that was my real superpower. I think that maths was what saved me during my IIT days as well. Finally, I think we were in Nangal, which is a small township for engineers who are working in Bhakra Dam. And my dad told me that, look, we should go prepare for IIT. And I landed up in Delhi, spent 2 years in Delhi, 11th and 12th, preparing for JEE. Somehow cleared the JEE. Again, math saved me. Barely crossed the minimum marks required for chemistry. But finally landed at IIT Kharagpur as a mechanical engineer. Again, there math saved me. I was good at actually physics and maths. So did very well in mechanical first year and ended up changing my branch from mechanical to computer science post first year. Right? There's a provision to change your branch at IIT Kharagpur. Spent next 3 years, but kept regretting for the entire 3 years that why did I change my branch?
Yeah.
I was a topper in mechanical and I was literally no one in computer science. I struggled a lot in computer science and was a very underconfident guy when I graduated. I graduated back in 2010. Joined Microsoft, worked there for about 2 years. But I think while working at Microsoft, I realized that naturally I may not be very good at something, but I'm very good at putting a lot of hard work into anything I want to do, and then I'll figure out a way to crack it. Right? Like I will not shy away from spending crazy hours and just to learn about the industry, to solve a problem, to learn something new, right? And yeah, I worked there for 2 years, and that was Microsoft Research. Microsoft Research, I don't know if you know, basically figures out that what next for Microsoft. So you work on a lot of research projects, may not have a direct impact on business or product immediately. So I realized that it is not very exciting because whatever project you're working on will have impact on Microsoft products or business 5 years or 10 years down the line. And so I asked my manager, I said, like, where do you see the immediate impact of whatever you do? He said that you only see in startups. And at that time, Bhavish, founder of Ola, right? We used to report to same manager. We had an overlap of about 3 months. So when I joined Microsoft, he was just leaving Microsoft to start Ola. So he also had a lot of influence on me. He used to come to office. I was like, you know,
what are you doing here?
Ye kya kar raha hai? Why are you doing this? Right? Like, you should go and start something. And I think finally after 2 years at Microsoft, I decided saying, you know, look, I don't know what I'll do, but I'll definitely not continue at Microsoft. I'll figure out what I'll do. And then the entire startup journey started.
Wonderful. So maybe we'll come back, we'll go a little back and forth here, right? And actually my journey is actually sort of a combination of the two of you all, a few decades earlier, I guess. But I grew up in a small town in Orissa. Dad was in HAL, setting up the MiG engine factory there at a time when there was, you know, when people told me, look at the airplane, I would look on the ground, and then my mom had to say, you got to look up. There was like literally nothing out there. But yeah, math was sort of the first love. And then, you know, came to Bangalore, did my schooling and then my undergrad here locally, and then went to France for a couple of years, and then went to the US, University of Washington, and then worked in the Silicon Valley for about 11 years. So while I never did a startup over there, I was still always in the startup ecosystem, right? You can't be in Silicon Valley without inhaling the, at least by radiation, you know, I got a lot of the startup thing, and then
a lot of other stuff there, Sanjay.
Came back to India. Yeah, we shall keep those for after the show. But came back here in, you know, the early 2000s, and then of course I think our paths crossed during the first phase of sort of this whole mobile payments, the mobile commerce era. So maybe you can, Shrikant, you can talk about, you know, this 2005 to 2010 era, pre-Aadhaar, pre-mobile wallets and things like that. You joined ngpay, and they were sort of the pioneer in mobile commerce. And I was brought in to see as CEO of mChek, and we were running it from the payments perspective. So why don't you start with, you know, what you saw of the world there? We kind of competed, I guess, but we were also really partners in crime in many ways. So.
Right. So what we identified really, and the core of what we were trying to solve, was a distribution problem. Everything else, like the app, the, you know, APIs.
So this was in the era of Java phones, and those were the smartphones of the era.
No smartphones. I mean, you had those Nokia phones with the T9 keyboards. They were much more useful as physical weapons, and they would survive everything.
It's just true. There were ads showing that a truck could run over the Nokia 1100 and it would survive. Yeah.
And networks were 2G. Right? You had to actually send an SMS to an operator to get GPRS settings, and you would open internet in a session.
People here would not know what GPRS is, by the way. That was
not
the data network of the past. Yeah.
Not just another 4-letter word. But those were the constraints we were working under. And looking back now, those constraints made you work far more innovatively and frugally than what people are used to today. I mean, look at the kind of infrastructure you have today and the things that we take for granted, which never existed back in the day. To your point, identity, networks, etc. But even then, we spotted an opportunity where distribution was a key problem that we were trying to solve, specifically of digital goods. Right? Even back in the day, there were about 5 times the number of mobile phones in people's hands than desktop computers or laptop computers. So we said, if digital commerce has to start, it has to start on a mobile phone. Right? And if you start backward and work backwards from that, what are the problems that you need to solve for? One is discoverability. The second is the user experience. And the third is the fulfillment. And fulfillment was a nightmare at that time. So we stayed away from anything to do with physical fulfillment, very contrary to what Flipkart started. In fact, the anecdote is that we guys, Flipkart and ngpay, started about 2 blocks away in Koramangala, around 6 months after, before and after each other. So we narrowed down our focus to saying that anything that has a digital discovery, purchase and fulfillment is the starting point for mobile commerce back in the day. Right? So then we built a whole bunch of technology stacks behind it. But then, like in most cases, we found that the app's distribution was a huge bottleneck. Right? There were no app stores at that time. There were no smartphones. There was no way to go and get a customer to download an app. Right? First you had to tell a person what an app really was, and then why should I download it, and then how do I use it. It was massive in terms of customer education. So we spent the first 8-10 months trying various marketing tools, right? Getting people to test and use and all that stuff. What we found is that once somebody downloaded it, adoption and repeat usage was massive. And it was coming from all the tier 2 and tier 3 towns, not from your Delhis and Bombays only. And then we called up people, we actually sat with them. We found that a lot of people were actually doing transactions on behalf of somebody else, booking a train ticket for somebody else, booking a, I don't know,
interesting
bus ticket through Red Bus on behalf of somebody else. So in each of these clusters, you have people who are slightly digitally smarter, who know how to use this stuff. They are actually booking on behalf of 10 other people. Right?
Very interesting. The travel agent, informal.
They didn't call themselves that, but informally they were exactly that.
And that was your retention hook as well, essentially.
That was also a retention hook, because if you get more and more of these people to transact on other people's behalf, then that network effect hopefully catches up. But we still never cracked the scale problem on distribution, right? So then we kind of figured, okay, let's go where distribution already is, right? And in those days, and I think still today, the big beast in the room was IRCTC, right? The number one digital merchant, and the monopoly in their business, right? I mean, you could not book a ticket except for IRCTC. And their website had the highest traffic in all of Asia. At that time.
Yeah.
So we kind of went and spoke with them. They said, okay, you want to sell tickets on the phone? That's fine. I mean, we'll give you an agency code. You sell and you make whatever commissions that you get. Right? I still remember we got 20 rupees per AC ticket, 10 rupees per non-AC ticket, right? And 2 rupees per unreserved ticket. So that was a commercial model that IRCTC gave us, and we ran with it for some time. Then I said, hey,
but you had to take care of all the payment processing and all of
everything, all the stuff that goes behind it. Then we figured, listen, I mean, are we getting the best out of this relationship? So we went back to them and said, sir, aap ek kaam karo, Hindi and English together, okay. Ek kaam karo, aap 10 rupiya, 20 rupiya band karo. Aapke website pe ek download link de do. Just let people download the app from your website. I don't want your 10 rupees, 20 rupees on 1,000 transactions. Download links. They didn't understand the value of that real estate at that time, right? I mean, it was worked to our advantage. We didn't have to pay for it, too much, apart from, making do without some of the commissions. And that turned the tide for us. I mean, within a week, my IT guy was, shifting his place of residence and everything to Commercial Street, how do I buy so many servers and all that stuff? No cloud, no AWS, no Google Cloud, nothing, right? So it was phenomenal. I mean, it just showed us that if you get the proposition straight, if you keep the customer need front and center, and if you look at solving distribution problems through non-traditional means, you can actually create magic.
Very cool. Very cool. Maybe I'll share a little bit of what we were doing on the other side. In the way approach, we were 2 blocks away from Flipkart on the opposite side.
Okay.
Also in Koramangala. And I guess mChek story was, of course, it had been incubated in a little world and then spun out into a new entity, and DFJ initially, and then Nexus were the VCs. And I think the focus there was payments first, right? And I think that was a different thing to approach the problem from. And I was personally very passionate. In fact, I literally moved back to India when I saw an auto rickshaw driver. When I asked him time kya hai, he pulled out a phone. I said, oh my God, he has a terminal in his hand. And then sort of this whole thing of a phone could be used for payments sort of became the thing. And then later I found out about the regulatory system and what was there, etc. And then we tried to play within the rules, right? But I think for us, the philosophy was, look, distribution can only be solved at scale through the telcos at that time. And the one weapon that they had was a SIM card. And so maybe if there was a way to put an app on the SIM card, and I remember having early conversations with you later saying, these are things that are possible on the SIM card. Most people don't understand that a SIM card is actually a computer, right? And you can put an application on it. It's just that it has to be approved by the telcos and has to be burnt in, in the factory. There's very little over-the-air freedom. And at the time, the telcos had 8K and 16K SIM cards. And mChek ended up in the lightest weight form, like a 15K app. So we sort of helped migrate the telcos to the 64K world, and the SIM card manufacturers are pretty thrilled about it and so on. But that was still just the empty physical wallet, so to speak, but the payment instruments that had to be put in there were actually banking instruments, right? So you had to go and partner with two industries, get a distribution through one, but then the actual product was actually from somewhere else. And all the stuff that, Apple Pay has done today with tokenization and all that stuff is actually what we did in that generation. We used to call it an add-on card and a digital card, etc. But as you said, there was no cloud, nothing at the time. So we had to have a data center. There's some pretty comical stories as well, because Visa, who was the association that we were working with, they had what was called a card personalization bureau, and that's where the card gets your name written on it and so on. At the time, there was no concept of a digital card. So the card personalization bureau had had some very fancy rooms that we spent, several crores or millions of dollars trying to set up. There was actually a room where you were weighed. You went into the room, and then on the way back, they would check your weight again, right? So that you couldn't steal the plastic, right? And in order to get the center certified, I needed to show a physical safe. And I said, but we don't have plastic. This is a digital card. They said, no, there is no, you have to have a checkbox. It needs to have a safe. So I was so irritated. I said, okay, we will have a safe, but it doesn't say it should be closed. So we kept the safe open at all times. But we were forced to buy a safe, right? It was one of those comical moments. But, they said, look, someday a regulation will come for a digital perso bureau. But till that happens, if you want to get approved, buy a safe. I said, okay, fine. Let's go out and buy the safe, right? But there was also a time when the regulator was also trying to come to grips with what is this beast called a cell phone, right, or a wireless phone, because they were used to sort of the computer and web-based payments, and at that time India did not even have the second factor mandate, right? So it was still single factor. There was a bit of fraud happening because you just needed a card number expiry CVV2 and you could do a transaction. And, I remember Saurabh and I, from ngpay, and we used to literally sit in RBI's office and start, helping with them. We've probably written some chapters in the 2008 mobile banking guidelines, right? But I had to hand it to the regulator that they moved really fast. They said, look, this is a real thing, and we would rather have it regulated and have some guidelines around it so we know what to allow for, what not to allow for, and things like that. And fast forward to, I would say, 2008-9, we managed to get, crazy distribution, right? Because mChek got put on the SIM cards of both Airtel and later Docomo. Mm-hmm. And in fact, in mChek, we had a pop-up that would come every time you turn on your phone that said, welcome to mChek on Airtel, click here to get started. And so distribution of the physical wallet was at astronomical scale. We probably must have shipped 350 million SIM cards with this on it. But people were churning out of the telco systems also pretty fast. But the other half of it, which was getting people to actually open a bank account and preload the debit card into the wallet, that was way too much friction, right? Because there was no pre-Aadhaar days. That was part of the reason I decided to sort of chat with the Aadhaar team, and then of course Nandan brought us in as volunteers. That it would take 3 weeks to open a bank account, right? Even for the person who submitted the form and took the photograph, and KYC cost was to be borne by somebody. And it just was a technology. We were probably 2 generations early on the technology. As they say, it's good to be on the leading edge, but not good to be on the bleeding edge. And I think, the knives were really sharp when we started in that circle. We probably made a lot of mistakes also in hindsight. But I think individually we solved some pieces of the problem, but nobody collectively solved the problem, right? There was also Paymate as a third player. There was Tagit that did the PVR movie booking. It was the first time you could select the seats of a movie ticketing and things like that. We tried, USSD, it worked great whenever I used it, but the session would fail half the time. And, whether you're booking a flight ticket or you're booking a movie ticket, it was like, it could work, but for it to be robust and scalable, it just didn't think. And I think so that was that first era, and interestingly, Paymate has survived because they pivoted and moved into more of a B2B space. And then, of course, Aadhaar came, right, as we move on. And be interesting, Anshul, you were a student at the time in school during the first thing. So did any of these products, did you come across them? Maybe a friend using ngpay or something like that?
I think ngpay I remember.
Thank you.
So much for my branding of distributing on 350 million. Cut that part from the show.
ngpay I remember, but I think we were also thinking that, how did they basically get this killer? Good to hear that story of
IRCTC.
Right? Because I think at that point in time, obviously the distribution was the key, right? Like, how do you really acquire large number of customers, right? I mean, it is not like a digital era where people are ready in today's day and age, right? Any new product you launch, right? I think people are open now to experiment with new products. They will download it, try it out and all of that, right? But ngpay had a massive distribution, and we kept thinking, like, how did they really crack this? But mChek, I'm not sure, Sanjay. Like, I probably didn't have phone.
You needed a SIM, you didn't need a phone. By the way, in mChek, we used to find people who were actually, those who used it, similar model, who were using for others, they would have their SIM card which was activated, which had the bank account in it, but they didn't have a phone. So they would borrow somebody's phone, put it in, do their transactions, and take out the SIM. And different people use the same phone. So we even had done experiments around, okay, can we create like a shared phone version of it? It's like, but we also at the time, I have to say, experimented with like QR code based payment, because we also had a version, right? I still remember testing out on my on the website, on the mock website, like paying with the QR code, right? So it was like a lab, I think, in some ways. We did everything possible.
But that time, most of the phones had no camera.
No. The Java phones already had. From 2006 onwards, they all had cameras as well. Yeah. It was early days.
Sure.
But no, it's interesting that you go through these, and I think one thing was clear, at least for me, to continue to stick later, and continue in this domain a bit now more as an investor, was when it worked, it was awesome, right? And we would do prepaid recharges and bill payments and stuff for Airtel. That ended up being the main focus. We were probably doing 30-40 lakhs a day on a good day, right? Which is not a small volume, right? Especially at that time, which meant that we were doing several tens of crores or 100 crores over the course of a year. And, prepaid recharge had a built-in model there, right? Because it was a commercial model. They should be paying 3-4% in the value chain. So there was a business model there, etc. And those who used it would hardly churn. The moment somebody could do this thing, click, enter your PIN, and your recharge is done, or your bills are paid, you're hooked, right? So that Kunal talks about this Delta 4 experience, right? That definitely provided it at that point in time. But it just was...
If only someone could use it.
If somebody could use it, right? And that was the first part. That was I think, the biggest issue, right?
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, but this is a lovely anecdote. I won't name the person, but the founding CEO of one of the largest online travel agents at that time, I was in his office pitching to him, saying, great product, doing a demo and all that kind of stuff. And all of a sudden, he had to take a trip. He had to take an urgent trip back to Bangalore or whatever it is. And he said, okay, chalo.
Bought him his ticket.
I bought him his ticket on ngpay. Because his secretary had gone back home. There were no laptops at home, right? The travel agent was 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. or 7 p.m., whatever it is. And he didn't want to go and try his luck at the airport. So I booked him his ticket and said, here's a ticket, forwarded the SMS, just go take a printout at the airport. The next day, the deal was signed.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, some of the things we experienced, right, in that era, I mean, everybody had to expose APIs for the first time, right? So Airtel's billing system, that was the first time there was one where you could query the amount and where you could post a successful payment, with the auth code, etc. right after that, right? Because we wanted the next second if the customer says, it checks their bill, it should say paid.
Yep.
Right? And that had never been done earlier. Earlier, it was always, even if you went to their own stores, it would say it'll be paid after, it'll be updated after 72 hours or something like that. BillDesk, of course, had done a lot of sort of the groundwork in getting all the Bestcom, and they used to run Visa Bill Pay and all of these utilities. But even there, it was sort of a batch system. But they were also, again, a new age company, so they exposed APIs or they were working on it. I remember once in our case, Airtel migrated from their in-house system to IBM because they did that big agreement. And IBM magically one day, some customer was paying 1,000 rupee bill, ended up paying 1 lakh. And I said, what happened? I said, oops, we just upgraded the API. The new version is all in paisa, not in rupees and paisa. Right? But it happened. And then we had to coordinate with IBM and say, okay, when circle by circle, when you're taking them live, because we had to have a flag that said, okay, this circle is now on the paisa-based system, not on the rupee. But, teething trouble, right? Of course, we reimbursed that customer, or Airtel did. But, these were extraordinary sort of moments. And you look at it and say, wait a minute, I thought an API was supposed to take care of it. But it was the first generation of some of that stuff. But, today we take it for granted. Right now there is BBPS and all of these things, we can have complete interoperability. So it's come a long ways. And it's probably a good segue into the start of that, where we have ended up now. And that was probably the Aadhaar journey. And that's where that started. And in parallel, I think by that time the telcos had kind of realized that trying to do this in partnership with the banks is, you're never going to be able to plan anything. And so there was a strong push for mobile wallets. And of course, now we have complete interoperability with UPI and the banking system.
Dear listeners, thank you for listening to this episode of the podcast. Subscribe now on your favorite podcast app for free, and you'll be the first one to know when new episodes are available. Just search for Prime Venture Partners Podcast in Apple Podcast, Spotify, Castbox, or however you get your podcasts. Then hit subscribe. And if you have enjoyed the show, we would be really grateful if you leave us a review on Apple Podcast. To read the full transcript, find the link in the show notes.